Sit down there now, and let me tell you something they don't want you to know. You see, everyone's running around Dublin and Cork, paying €2,000 a month for a shoebox apartment with a view of another shoebox, and they think that's just the way it is. Sure, look, the government would have you believe every square inch of this island is accounted for, taxed, regulated and monitored by some fellow in a high-vis jacket with a clipboard. But here's the thing, lad. They're lying. Not outright, mind you, because that would require effort. No, they just forgot. And in that forgetting, there are places on this green island where a person can still live free. Live completely free. So support the channel by subscribing and let's start. Number 10. The Barra Peninsula's abandoned townlands. Now, I'm going to start you off gentle, like easing into a cold bath. The Barra Peninsula, stretching between Cork and Kerry, like a finger pointing out toward America and saying there has to be something better out there. And you know what? There is something better, and it's right here on Barra itself. You just have to know where to look. The thing about Barra is that it was never fully tamed by the modern Irish state. Sure, they built a few roads, threw up some signage for the tourists, and called it a day. But venture off that main road, up into the townlands that cling to the hillsides like desperate sheep, and you'll find something remarkable. Emptiness. Beautiful, forgotten, glorious emptiness. Take the townland of Knockmealdown, for instance. I bet my pension you've never heard of it, and neither has anyone in the planning office. Back in 1845, before the famine, there were over 200 souls living up there, farming, fishing, getting on with life. Today, maybe 3 occupied houses, and I'm being generous. The rest are ruins or rebuilt holiday homes owned by Germans who visit once every 4 years. But here's where it gets interesting for the aspiring free liver. Between those ruins and those holiday homes, there are plots of land that exist in a sort of bureaucratic limbo. The original owners emigrated or died without heirs. The Land Commission never got around to redistributing them. The County Council has them on maps from 1923 that nobody has updated since. For all practical purposes, these plots exist outside the system. Now, I'm not telling you to squat on land that isn't yours. That would be illegal, and I am a respectable grandfather figure. What I am telling you is that land in these forgotten townlands can be purchased for as little as €5,000 per acre. Sometimes less if you find a farmer who inherited a patch he's never visited and just wants it off his books. There's no mains water up there, which means no water charges. There's no gas connection, which means no gas bills. Electricity reaches some areas, but plenty of spots are still off-grid by default rather than choice. The planning regulations technically apply, but enforcement is another matter entirely. The council would need to drive 45 minutes up a boreen that damages their vehicles, find your small dwelling tucked behind a hill, determine it violates some regulation, issue a notice, and then follow up. They have neither the staff nor the inclination. I've seen lads build entire homes up there using traditional methods, stone and timber and good honest work, and live for 15 years without a single official ever darkening their doorstep. The climate is mild, tempered by the Atlantic. You'll get rain, obviously, this is Ireland, but the Gulf Stream keeps the frost away most winters. Grow your vegetables, keep a few chickens, maybe a goat if you're feeling ambitious. The fishing is free if you're not commercial about it. And the community that does exist up there tends toward the live and let live philosophy. They've seen enough government interference over the centuries to have developed a healthy skepticism of anyone with a clipboard. Number 9. The Slieve Aughty Mountains' hidden valleys. Now we move east, into the heart of the country, to a place so overlooked that even most Irish people couldn't point to it on a map. The Slieve Aughty Mountains, straddling the border between Galway and Clare, are not mountains in any dramatic sense. They're more like ambitious hills that got above themselves, but that's precisely their advantage. The Slieve Aughties were never profitable enough to develop, and never scenic enough to attract the tourist hordes. They sit in a sort of economic dead zone, too far from Galway city to be commuter territory, too close to be properly remote. The result is a landscape dotted with abandoned farmsteads, forestry plantations that nobody monitors, and valleys where you could fire a cannon and hit nothing but confused sheep. I know a man, and I won't name him because he values his privacy, who bought 30 acres up there in 2008 for €12,000 total. That's €400 per acre, and the land came with a ruined cottage that had planning permission grandfathered in from the 1950s. He rebuilt that cottage using materials salvaged from other ruins, installed a rainwater collection system, set up solar panels when they became affordable, and has lived there for 16 years now. His total annual expenses, excluding food he grows himself, come to roughly €800. That covers vehicle tax, insurance, and the occasional trip to town for supplies he can't produce. The key to the Slieve Aughtys is the forestry land. Comeragh, the state forestry company, owns vast tracts up there, but they're stretched thin and can't possibly monitor it all. Along the edges of their plantations, there are pockets of land that technically belong to someone but haven't been claimed or used in generations. Some of these plots have complicated ownership histories involving emigration to America in the 1880s, deaths without wills, and land commission decisions that were never properly registered. A clever person could research these plots, track down distant descendants who didn't even know they owned Irish land, and make an offer. I've heard of such arrangements being concluded for as little as €2,000, with the American cousin just happy to have the paperwork headache resolved. Once you own the land, you're dealing with a county council that covers an enormous rural area with minimal staff. They're focused on the towns, on the planning applications for housing estates and shopping centres. A small dwelling in the Slieve Aughtys, built sensitively and without making a fuss, simply doesn't register on their radar. Water comes from springs and rainfall. Heat comes from the timber that grows abundantly all around. Food comes from the land if you're willing to work it, and from the shops in Lochrea or Gort when you need variety. The broadband situation has actually improved dramatically in recent years, with rural wireless providers reaching places that seemed impossibly remote. You could run a small online business from a Slieve Aughty valley and nobody would be the wiser. Number 8. The Sperrin Mountains of Tyrone. Now I'm going to take you north, across that invisible border that caused so much trouble and still confuses delivery drivers. The Sperrins are the largest mountain range in Northern Ireland, which sounds impressive until you realise they're competing with a fairly modest field. But their size is their blessing. There's simply too much space up there for anyone to properly control. The Sperrins have a complicated history, like everywhere in the north, but that complexity works in favour of someone seeking freedom. The land ownership patterns are a patchwork of small farms, some still worked by families who've been there for generations, others lying fallow because the children moved to Belfast or London and never came back. Between these working and abandoned farms, there are corners that nobody's quite sure about. I spoke with a woman from Tyrone, a lovely lady with strong opinions about the government on both sides of the border, who told me about families living up in the Sperrins essentially off the books, not because they're hiding from anyone, but because nobody ever came looking. They heat with turf cut from bogs that have been in their families for centuries. They grow vegetables in gardens that their great-grandmothers established. They keep to themselves, help their neighbours, and deal with officials only when absolutely necessary. The remarkable thing about the Sperrins is the availability of ruined cottages with land attached. The famine hit this area hard, and then emigration took another wave. And then the Troubles encouraged more people to leave for quieter pastures. The result is a landscape littered with potential homes for those willing to put in the work. I've seen listings for derelict cottages with 5 acres going for £25,000. That's below the threshold for most mortgage requirements, meaning you could buy outright if you've saved carefully. Building regulations in Northern Ireland are different from the Republic, and in some ways more relaxed for rural dwellings. There's a tradition of what they call replacement dwellings, where you can build a new home on the footprint of an old ruin, without the same scrutiny a completely new build would receive. The interpretation of this policy varies by council, but in the rural reaches of the Sperrins, interpretation tends toward the generous. Water comes from wells and springs that have never failed in living memory. The rainfall sees to that. Electricity reaches most areas, but going off-grid with solar and wind is increasingly common and increasingly accepted. The community is close-knit in that way rural communities are, suspicious of strangers at first, but welcoming once you've proven you're not there to cause trouble. And the council, based in Omagh, has bigger concerns than someone building a modest life in the hills. Number 7. The Nephin Beg Wilderness. And now I'm going to tell you about a place that shouldn't exist in modern Ireland, but somehow does. The Nephin Beg Range in County Mayo contains the largest remaining wilderness area in Ireland or Britain. Over 100 square kilometres where the hand of man has been so light it might as well be invisible. During the famine, the area around Nephin Beg lost most of its population. Those who survived emigrated, and the land they left behind was simply never reclaimed. The bogs took over, the heather spread, and nature reasserted itself. Today you can walk for hours through the Nephin Beg without seeing another human being, without seeing any sign that humans ever existed except for the occasional stone wall crumbling into the peat. The area is technically protected now, part of the Ballycroy National Park, which complicates things. You can't just set up the camp and declare yourself king of the bog. But around the edges of the wilderness, in the townlands that ring the unpopulated centre, the same opportunities exist as elsewhere. Land that nobody wants because it's too remote, too wet, too difficult, which is another way of saying land that nobody will bother you about. I know of at least 3 families living on the margins of the Nephin Beg in what you might call informal arrangements. They bought small parcels decades ago when the prices were even lower than today. They built dwellings that technically required planning permission they never sought. They've lived there ever since, raising children, growing old, bothering nobody and being bothered by nobody in return. The nearest Garda station is in Crossmolina, over 30 kilometres away on roads that would shake the teeth out of your head. The practical challenges are real. This is properly remote country, and you need to be comfortable with isolation. The weather comes straight off the Atlantic with nothing to stop it, which means horizontal rain and winds that would humble a lesser person. But for someone genuinely committed to living free, the Nephin Beg margins offer something increasingly rare: true privacy. You could live your entire life out there and encounter officialdom only when you chose to. The land prices reflect the remoteness. I've seen parcels of 10 acres or more going for under 15,000 euros. Ruined cottages with land, the kind that would cost 200,000 near any town, can be found for 30 or 40,000. The catch is you'll need to be self-sufficient in ways most modern Irish people have forgotten. Rainwater harvesting, solar and wind power, growing your own food, maintaining your own dwelling. But if that sounds like freedom rather than hardship, the Nephin Beg is calling your name. Subscribe now to prove these videos actually help and actually make sense. Or don't, and wonder for the rest of your days what was in the second half. Your choice entirely. Number 6. The Leitrim Lakeland Corridors. Leitrim. Poor forgotten wonderful Leitrim. The county that even other Irish counties forget exists. When people list the 32 counties, Leitrim is the one they leave out and then have to go back and add. And this forgetting, this chronic national amnesia about Leitrim's very existence, is precisely what makes it a paradise for free living. Leitrim has the smallest population of any county in Ireland, and it's been that way for as long as anyone can remember. The young people leave for Dublin, or London, or Sydney, and they don't come back. The result is a county with vast tracts of land, and hardly anyone living on them. The townlands around the lakes, Lough Allen, Lough Melvin, Lough Gill, are dotted with houses that stand empty, fields that lie fallow, and potential that goes unrealised. The land prices in Leitrim are legendary among those seeking affordable rural property. I've personally seen sites of 1 acre with full planning permission going for 8,000 euros. Full houses, habitable if dated, selling for under 50,000. Farmsteads with outbuildings and 20 acres changing hands for what you'd pay for a parking space in Dublin. The market simply doesn't function here the way it does elsewhere, because there's no demand to drive prices up. But here's the thing about Leitrim that sets it apart from the other places I've mentioned. It's not actually that remote. You can be in Sligo town in 30 minutes, in Dublin in 2.5 hours. The roads are decent. The broadband has improved enormously. It's the most practical of the forgotten territories for someone who wants to live free but doesn't want to completely abandon civilization. The lake corridors are particularly attractive because of the microclimate. The water moderates the temperature, making winters milder and summers more pleasant than the surrounding hills. The fishing is extraordinary, and nobody's going to ask for your license on a lake that sees a handful of anglers per year. The soil around the lakes is surprisingly good. Glacial deposits that grow vegetables beautifully if you're willing to clear the rushes first. I knew an English couple, lovely people who'd had enough of London, who bought a small cottage with 3 acres near Lough Allen for €22,000 in 2015. They've spent another $30,000 over the years renovating and improving, doing most of the work themselves. Their property is now worth perhaps $70,000, a profit on paper, but they're not interested in selling. They're interested in living. Their annual outgoings come to about €3,000, covering insurance, vehicle costs, and the few things they can't produce themselves. By any reasonable measure, they've escaped the rat race. Number 5. The Iveragh Peninsula interior. Everyone knows the Ring of Kerry. The tour buses clog the coastal road from March to October, disgorging visitors to take photos of the same views that appear on every postcard. But behind that coastal strip, in the interior of the Iveragh Peninsula, lies a different world entirely. A world the tourists never see because the buses can't fit on the Barines, and the sat-nav gives up in despair. The interior of Iveragh is mountain and bog and valley, punctuated by townlands that once held thriving communities and now hold shadows. Names like Mastergahey, Dromid, Kilgarvan that mean nothing to anyone who hasn't walked their fields. The population density here rivals anywhere in Europe for emptiness, and the land reflects that neglect. You could buy your freedom here for less than the price of a car. I met an old farmer outside Waterville who told me about families up in the Iveragh interior living exactly as their grandparents lived. No mains water because none was ever installed. No gas because it never reached there. Electricity, yes, because the rural electrification scheme was thorough. But some households choosing to disconnect anyway when the panels became cheap enough. Living on turf from the bog, vegetables from the garden, sheep from the mountain, and asking permission from nobody. The planning situation in Kerry is interesting because the council has historically been more lenient with rural one-off housing than other counties. They understand that Kerry's landscape was shaped by scattered settlement, and they've been less aggressive about concentrating population in towns. What this means for the aspiring free liver is that permission for a small dwelling on family land, or even on purchased land with the right circumstances, is more achievable than elsewhere. The interior of Iveragh has another advantage that's becoming increasingly relevant: climate resilience. As the weather becomes more unpredictable, the sheltered valleys of the interior, protected by mountains on most sides, offer the stability that coastal areas can't match. The floods that devastate Midland towns don't reach here because the land drains naturally into 100 small streams. The storms that batter the coast lose their force by the time they've crossed the ridges. For those worried about the isolation, the town of Kenmare is never more than an hour away. It's a proper town with shops, pubs, a hospital, everything you might need when you need it. But the beauty of interior Iveragh is that you don't need it often. The land provides if you know how to listen to what it's offering. Number 4. The Knockmealdown Mountains Eastern Slopes. Up in Sligo and Mayo, there's a range called the Knockmealdown Mountains that gets overlooked because it sits between more famous beauties. To the west, the dramatic coast that inspired Yeats. To the east, the lakes and forests that draw the anglers. The Knockmealdown Mountains just sit there in between, humble and ignored, which is exactly how they like it. The eastern slopes of the Knockmealdown Mountains, facing toward the interior of Ireland rather than the sea, have a character all their own. Gentler than the western faces, more fertile in the valleys, but still empty enough that you could shout and hear only sheep in reply. The villages here have names like Bunninadden, Cullaney, Tobercurry, and populations measured in hundreds rather than thousands. Land on the eastern Knockmealdown slopes is priced for local farmers, not for speculators or refugees from the cities, which means prices that seem almost fictional to anyone used to the property market elsewhere. But tour, I've seen ads for 15 acres with mountain grazing rights going for €20,000. Ruined houses that would cost nothing except the legal fees to establish clear title. The market barely exists here because so few people are looking. But here's what makes the Ox Mountains special for free living. The forestry rights and commonage traditions that still prevail. Much of the higher ground is common land, owned collectively by the farmers whose properties border it. Their sheep graze it freely. Their turf rights extend to it. Their claim to it is ancient and unwritten. An incomer who buys land bordering the commonage inherits, in practice if not in law, access to resources far beyond their purchased acres. The practical reality is that someone living on the eastern Ox slopes can heat their home from commonage turf forever without spending a cent beyond their own labour. They can run a few sheep on the mountain without anyone objecting, as long as they don't take the mick. They can harvest timber from the forestry plantations that nobody's monitoring anyway. The enforcement apparatus simply doesn't extend this far into the hills. I know a man living up there who hasn't had a utility bill since 2003. He heats with turf and timber, collects rainwater, generates electricity with a small wind turbine he bought secondhand from a farmer who was upgrading. His house isn't officially habitable by any council standard, but nobody's ever come to check. He's raised 3 children there, grown old with his wife, and intends to die there without ever having filled out a planning application. Number 3. The Mullet Peninsula's forgotten back roads. Now, I take you to one of the strangest places in Ireland, a peninsula hanging off the west coast of Mayo, like an afterthought. The Mullet is connected to the mainland by a narrow isthmus, and everything about its geography suggests isolation. But the kind of isolation you find on the Mullet isn't the splendid emptiness of the Nephin Beg. It's more a sense that the world simply forgot to include this place in its plans. The Mullet had a significant population once, spread across small farms and fishing communities. The famine reduced it drastically, and emigration took more with every generation after. Today, the main settlements of Beaumullet and Blacksod have a few thousand souls between them. But venture off the main road onto the back Boreens, and you'll find townlands where the population has been zero for decades. What remains are ruins and possibilities. Stone cottages with roofs fallen in, but walls still sound. Fields marked by ancient walls, cleared of stones by hands long since turned to dust, and a landscape of such fierce, melancholy beauty that it either grabs your soul or repels you entirely. The prices on the Mullet are the lowest I've encountered anywhere in Ireland. Land that would be a fortune elsewhere goes begging here for want of buyers. I've heard reliable accounts of entire ruined farmsteads, house and outbuildings in 20 acres, changing hands for under €10,000. The catch is obvious. You're buying into genuine remoteness, genuine difficulty, genuine weather that will test your commitment. But for those tests, you get something precious, complete freedom from oversight. The county council in Castlebar is 3 hours away on roads that discourage casual visits. The guards in Mullet have a parish the size of a European microstate to cover, and no interest in what someone's building on a back road. The community that remains is elderly, taciturn, and deeply committed to minding their own business. I spoke with a young couple, German originally, but with better Irish than most Irish people, who moved to a back road on the Mullet in 2019. They bought a ruined cottage with 7 acres for €14,000, spent 2 years rebuilding it, using traditional methods and modern efficiency technologies, and now live entirely off their small patch in the sea. Their carbon footprint is effectively zero. Their interaction with the state is effectively zero. Their happiness, they claim, is boundless. Number 2. The Knockmealdown Mountains. Southern valleys, between Waterford and Tipperary, there's a mountain range that even many Irish people have never heard of. The Knockmealdowns run east to west, creating a natural barrier that historically separated the counties on either side. And in the valleys that cut into the southern slopes, facing toward the Blackwater River, there are communities so quiet you'd swear time stopped moving. The Knockmealdowns have a microclimate that's unusual for Ireland. The southern exposure means more sun and less rain than you'd expect. The Blackwater moderates the temperature. The result is land that's genuinely productive, able to grow things that would fail in wetter, colder parts of the country. If you're thinking about self-sufficiency, about genuinely feeding yourself from your own land, the southern Knockmealdown are among the best options available. The area never recovered from the land war of the 1880s, when tenant farmers challenged landlords and many estates were broken up chaotically. The ownership patterns that emerged were fragmented and complicated, and they've only become more so with each passing generation. Finding clear title to land in the Knockmealdown can be a legal adventure, but that complexity works both ways. It discourages developers and speculators, keeping prices low for those patient enough to navigate the paperwork. I've researched properties in the southern valleys extensively because I nearly bought one myself back in 2010. At that time, you could get a habitable cottage with 10 acres for €60,000. Today, the same property might be 80 or 90,000, still a fraction of what it would cost closer to any city. The infrastructure is better than you'd expect. Decent roads, reliable electricity, even fibre broadband reaching into valleys that have no other claim to modernity. The community in the southern Knockmealdown is mixed. Old farming families who've been there for centuries, blow-ins from England and Germany who discovered the area in the 1980s, and a newer wave of young Irish people priced out of everywhere else. They coexist peacefully, united by a shared appreciation for being left alone. The council rarely ventures up the valleys unless invited, and the Gardaí are a theoretical presence rather than an actual one. What I find most attractive about the Knockmealdown is the balance they strike. Remote enough to be free, accessible enough to not be trapped, productive enough to support genuine self-sufficiency, mild enough that the challenges are manageable. If I were advising a young person today where to establish their free life, the southern Knockmealdown would be high on my list. Number 1. The Comeragh Mountains hidden coombs. And now we arrive at my number 1, the place I've saved for last because it deserves the honour. The Comeragh Mountains in County Waterford contain something extraordinary. Glacial valleys, called coombs, carved into the plateau like bowls in a table. These coombs are hidden from the surrounding lowlands, accessible only by climbing the ridges that ring them, and inside them lies a world apart. The coombs of the Comeraghs were settled in ancient times, evidenced by the ring forts and standing stones scattered through them. But the people who built those monuments are long gone, and for centuries the coombs have been the domain of sheep, eagles, and the occasional hiker who ventures beyond the usual paths. The land belongs, technically, to farmers whose properties begin in the lowlands and extend up into the mountains, but many of them have never visited the upper reaches of their own holdings. What this means for the aspiring free liver is opportunity. The coombs are not public land, but they're not actively used either. The farmers who own them are often elderly, without heirs interested in continuing the farming tradition, and open to selling off mountain sections they'll never use themselves. I have heard of coomb land being purchased for as little as €500 per acre, though you'd need to approach the owners directly, rather than expecting to find listings. Living in a coomb would not be easy. The access is difficult, requiring either a serious four-wheel drive or a willingness to walk significant distances. The weather funnels through the gaps in the ridges, bringing rain and wind in quantities that would discourage the uncommitted. There's no electricity, no water mains, no services of any kind. You would be genuinely, profoundly alone. But you would also be genuinely, profoundly free. The councils don't venture into the coombs because there's nothing there to inspect. The guards don't patrol them because there's nobody there to protect. The tax authorities don't survey them because there's nothing there to value. For all practical purposes, living in a Comeragh coomb would be living outside the modern Irish state entirely. I know of 2 individuals currently inhabiting the coombs, and I won't say more than that to protect their privacy. They live in dwellings they built themselves from stone gathered on site. They heat with timber carried up from the forests below. They eat what they grow, what they gather, and what they hunt, and hunting in the coombs is both productive and unmonitored. Their lives would be unrecognizable to most modern Irish people, but they would be familiar to our ancestors who lived the same way for thousands of years. The Comeraghs represent the purest expression of what I've been describing throughout this list, the possibility of living free on Irish land. Not comfortable, perhaps, not easy, certainly, but free in a way that has almost vanished from our overcrowded, over-regulated island. The coombs are waiting for anyone brave enough to claim them. And there you have it now, 10 forgotten corners of Ireland, where a person can still live outside the reach of clipboards and regulations and monthly bills. I've given you the information. What you do with it is your own affair. Some of you will dismiss this as the ramblings of an old man who doesn't understand modern realities. Fair enough. Keep paying your €2,000 a month for your Dublin bedsit and tell yourself you're being sensible. But some of you, maybe just one or two, will hear something in what I've said that resonates. You'll start researching. You'll start planning. And maybe in a year or 5 years or 10, you'll find yourself standing on a hillside in Leitrim or the Sperrins or the Comeraghs, looking out over land that's yours, breathing air that belongs to nobody, and wondering why you ever lived any other way. The choice is yours. It always has been. The system counts on you believing you have no choice, that the path from school to job to mortgage to grave is the only path available. But here's the secret they don't want you to know. The path is only mandatory if you stay on the road. Step off the road into the forgotten territories I've described, and you become invisible to the machinery that controls everyone else. Now, I'm not saying this life is for everyone. It requires work, real physical work of the kind that most modern people have never done. It requires sacrifice, giving up conveniences and comforts that seem essential until you realize they're not. It requires courage, the willingness to stand apart from society and accept that some people will think you've lost your mind. But for those who have the work ethic, the willingness to sacrifice, and the courage to be different, Ireland still offers what it has always offered: land, freedom, and the chance to build a life on your own terms. The forgotten territories are out there, waiting. The only question is whether you're willing to find them.